position.
The jury has convicted Natalie Harper of 2 counts of first-degree murder. I hereby sentence her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court has carefully considered the evidence and the arguments presented, and the law is clear in this matter.
17-year-old poisons parents' Christmas eggnog for $3 in inheritance, gets life in prison. True crime. The perfect family's last Christmas. The Harper family home at 2847 Oakmont Drive stood as a monument to the American dream realized. In the exclusive Ashbury Heights subdivision of Naperville, Illinois, where the median home price exceeded $1.20 million, street names like Prosperity Lane and Heritage Court broadcast success. The Harper residents commanded particular respect. A sprawling Tudor revival with professionally maintained landscaping, it broadcast affluence without vulgarity. The Christmas decorations reflected the same measured taste. Tasteful white lights traced the roofline. A dignified wreath of fresh pine adorned the oak front door, and through the bay window, a 9-foot Fraser fir stood decorated in gold and burgundy ornament. Inside, on the evening of December 24, 2020, the Harper family gathered for their annual Christmas Eve dinner. It was a tradition they had maintained for 17 years, since the birth of their only child. The menu never varied. Herb-crusted prime rib, roasted Brussels sprouts with pancetta, garlic mashed potatoes, and homemade Parker House rolls. And of course, the eggnog made from Catherine's grandmother's recipe, a yellowed index card written in elegant cursive that had been passed down through 3 generations. David Harper, 52 years old, had spent most of Christmas Eve at his office in downtown Chicago. As a senior managing director at Whitmore Capital Management, he oversaw a portfolio worth $840. His clients expected availability, even on holidays. The markets don't stop for Christmas, he liked to say. It was a philosophy that had made him wealthy and had also defined his approach to fatherhood. Success required sacrifice, and sacrifice required discipline. Catherine Harper, 49, had finished her shift at Loyola Medical Center at 3 in the afternoon. As chief of pediatric surgery, she had performed an emergency appendectomy that morning on a 7-year-old boy, ensuring he would wake up Christmas morning in recovery rather than agony. Catherine approached both surgery and motherhood with the same meticulous precision. Every incision had to be exact. Every decision had to be measured. Every outcome had to be optimal. Their daughter, Natalie Harper, 17 years old, had spent the day alone in the house. She was a senior at Naperville Central High School, ranked 3rd in her class of 487 students. She had scored 1570 on the SAT, earned early acceptance to Northwestern University with a presidential scholarship, and served as editor-in-chief of the school newspaper. Her college essay, titled The Architecture of Ambition, had won a regional writing competition. Teachers described her as exceptionally mature, remarkably composed, and destined for significant achievement. None of them, not the teachers, not the neighbors, not even her parents, knew that by 2:17 a.m. on Christmas morning, David and Catherine Harper would be dead, and Natalie would be in police custody, facing 2 counts of first-degree murder. The evening had begun like every other Christmas Eve. Catherine arrived home at 3:45 p.m. and immediately began preparing dinner. She had purchased the prime rib 2 days earlier from a specialty butcher in Oak Brook, ensuring it would be properly aged. She had hand-selected the Brussels sprouts at the farmer's market. She had made the Parker House rolls from scratch, timing the dough's rising to coincide with the roast's final hour in the oven. David arrived home at 6:45 p.m., 23 minutes later than he had promised. "Shanghai markets," he said, loosening his tie as he entered through the garage. "We had a situation with the Chen portfolio. You know how it is." Catherine did know. Their marriage had long since evolved from romance into a partnership of mutual professional respect and coordinated household management. They had met at Northwestern University 26 years earlier, he studying economics, she in pre-med, and had approached their relationship with the same strategic planning they brought to their careers. They married 3 years after Catherine completed her residency. They purchased their first home 2 years after that. Natalie was born precisely 3 years later, when both parents felt, as Catherine explained to friends, financially and emotionally prepared for the responsibility of parenthood. Natalie had been setting the table when her father arrived. This was her designated responsibility every Christmas Eve, arranging the Lenox china, polishing the Waterford crystal, folding the linen napkins, and preparing the drinks. She knew the ritual by heart. Her father's scotch, Macallan 18, 2 fingers, 1 ice cube. Her mother's wine, Cakebread Cellars Chardonnay, chilled to exactly 50 degrees. And the eggnog, the Harper family's sacred tradition, prepared from that yellowed recipe card, kept in a protective plastic sleeve in the kitchen drawer. The eggnog recipe required precision. 6 egg yolks, whisked until pale and thick. Heavy cream, folded in slowly to avoid curdling. Granulated sugar, added in increments. Pure vanilla extract, exactly 1 tablespoon. Fresh grated nutmeg, precisely 1 teaspoon. And for the adults' portions, 2 ounces of bourbon per cup, never more, never less. Natalie had made the eggnog at 7:30 p.m. She had followed the recipe card exactly, the way her mother had taught her when she was 12 years old. She had whisked the eggs in the copper bowl. She had folded in the cream with a wooden spoon. She had grated the nutmeg using her great-grandmother's tiny grater. She had measured the bourbon for her parents' portions using the jigger. And then, at 7:38 p.m., while her parents were upstairs changing into their Christmas Eve attire, Natalie had retrieved 2 items from her bedroom closet: a Tupperware container and a small plastic funnel. The Tupperware contained approximately 240 milliliters of Prestone low-tox antifreeze, a clear, slightly viscous liquid that smelled faintly sweet. Natalie had poured it from one of the gallon jugs she had purchased 6 days earlier at the AutoZone on Route 59. She had been careful to use a funnel, to avoid spills, to leave no trace. She had carried the Tupperware down to the kitchen. She had set the 2 crystal punch cups, her parents' cups, already filled with bourbon-spiked eggnog, on the counter. She had inserted the funnel into the first cup and carefully poured 120 milliliters of antifreeze, measuring precisely. She had repeated the process with the second cup. She had stirred each cup exactly 30 times, counting quietly, ensuring the antifreeze mixed thoroughly with the eggnog's cream and bourbon. The antifreeze was colorless. It had a slightly sweet taste that would be masked by the sugar and bourbon. Ethylene glycol, the active ingredient, was toxic at doses above 30 milliliters. At 120 milliliters, it was lethal. Natalie had washed the Tupperware and funnel in the sink, dried them with a dish towel, and returned them to her closet. Then she had carried the 3 cups of eggnog into the dining room on the silver tray her mother used every Christmas Eve. "Merry Christmas," she had said, placing the cups before her parents. She had placed her own cup, unpoisoned, at her seat. She would pretend to drink it, and then, when no one was looking, she would pour it down the sink. Dinner proceeded with the stilted, formal conversation that had characterized Harper family meals for as long as Natalie could remember. David discussed the global economic implications of the pandemic, the stimulus packages, the Federal Reserve's monetary policy. Catherine described a surgical case from earlier in the week, a 3-year-old with a rare congenital defect, a surgery that had taken 11 hours, a successful outcome that would be written up in a medical journal. Natalie mentioned her winter break plans. She would be studying for AP exams Calculus BC, Physics C, English Literature. She would complete her housing application for Northwestern. She would begin preliminary research for her senior thesis. "Remember that the presidential scholarship requires maintaining a 3.8 GPA, Catherine had said, cutting her prime rib with surgical precision. "You'll need to establish excellent study habits from day one. Medical school admission committees look at the entire undergraduate transcript." "I'm not planning on medical school, Mom. I'm majoring in journalism." "Journalism?" David had set down his fork. "Natalie, we've discussed this. The media industry is collapsing. Print journalism is dead. Digital media pays poverty wages. With your intellect and work ethic, you could be earning $200,000 a year in finance by the time you're 30. I don't want to work in finance, Dad. What you want and what's practical are often different things. I've already reached out to 3 Northwestern alumni in the financial sector who've agreed to mentor you. Can we not do this tonight? Natalie's voice had remained calm, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her fork. We're trying to help you make informed decisions, Catherine said. You're exceptionally gifted, Natalie. We simply want you to maximize your potential. The conversation had moved on. The new Tesla Catherine was considering the possibility of a spring break trip to Barcelona. The renovations David wanted for his home office. Normal conversation. Wealthy conversation. Unremarkable conversation. At 8:15 p.m., they moved to the living room for the traditional reading of Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol. David read it aloud every Christmas Eve, had done so since Natalie was 3 years old. It was one of the few traditions he insisted upon, one of the few moments when David Harper allowed sentiment to override pragmatism. He had reached the section with Marley's ghost, I wear the chain I forged in life, when Catherine interrupted. I don't feel well. David looked up from the leather-bound book. What's wrong? My stomach. And I'm dizzy. She pressed her hand to her abdomen. Very sudden. Did you eat something earlier, that? No, just dinner. The same thing you ate. Catherine stood, then swayed. David dropped the book and caught her arm. Catherine? Honey? I think I need to lie down. Her words were beginning to slur. Something's very wrong. David felt it then, too, a wave of nausea rolling through his stomach, a strange floating sensation in his head, a metallic taste in his mouth. I feel it too. Jesus, what the hell is this? Natalie watched from her chair near the Christmas tree, her hands folded in her lap, her expression neutral. Should I call 911? No, just a... David stumbled, caught himself on the arm of the sofa. The room was beginning to spin. Just give us a minute. Might be food poisoning. Might be... I'll call 911, Natalie said. She pulled out her phone and dialed with steady hands. The 911 operator answered on the second ring. 911. What's your emergency? My parents are sick, Natalie said, her voice calm and clear. They're dizzy and nauseous. I think maybe it's food poisoning. What's your address? 287 Oakmont Drive, Naperville. Are they conscious? Yes, they're conscious. They're not feeling well. I'm dispatching paramedics now. Stay on the line with me. Can you tell me exactly what symptoms? Actually, never mind, Natalie said. They're saying they feel better now. Sorry. She disconnected the call. Neither David nor Catherine had heard this exchange. David had collapsed onto the sofa, his vision blurring, his heart racing. Catherine had made it to the bathroom, where she vomited violently into the toilet, heaving until there was nothing left. The symptoms would worsen over the next 90 minutes. The nausea would give way to confusion. The dizziness would become disorientation. Their speech would slur further. They would begin to hyperventilate as their bodies struggled to metabolize the poison flooding their systems. Ethylene glycol breaks down into glycolic acid and oxalic acid in the body. These metabolites cause metabolic acidosis, kidney failure, and eventually death. The process is agonizing. The victims remain conscious for much of it, aware that something catastrophic is happening, but unable to understand what. At 9:52 p.m., David Harper began seizing on the living room floor, his body convulsing, foam forming at his mouth. Natalie called 911 again. This time, she stayed on the line. The investigation begins. Detective Sarah Rivera of the Naperville Police Department had been home with her family when the call came through. Her 2 daughters, ages 6 and 9, were still awake despite her best efforts to get them to bed. They were too excited about Christmas morning, too hopped up on sugar cookies and anticipation. Sarah's wife, Elena, was reading them the night before Christmas for the 3rd time, when Sarah's phone buzzed. The text from dispatch was brief but alarming. Possible double homicide, 2847 Oakmont Drive. Ashbury Heights. 2 adults. Unknown cause. Responding officers request detective on scene. Sarah had kissed her daughters, apologized to Elena, and driven through the empty, snow-dusted streets of Naperville. In her 11 years as a detective, 17 years total in law enforcement, she had never been called to a scene on Christmas Eve. Naperville wasn't a high-crime city. It consistently ranked among the safest cities in America. Most of Sarah's cases involved white-collar fraud, property crimes, the occasional domestic dispute. Homicides were rare. Double homicides were almost unheard of. The scene at 2847 Oakmont Drive was controlled chaos when Sarah arrived at 10:18 p.m. on 2. 2 ambulances blocked the circular driveway, their emergency lights painting the snow red and blue. 4 patrol cars lined the street. A fire truck idled at the curb. The front door stood open, bright light spilling out onto the porch where a uniformed officer stood guard. Officer James Chen met Sarah at the door. They had worked together before. Chen was a rookie when Sarah made detective, but he had good instincts and an eye for detail. "Detective," Chen said, his voice grim. "We've got 2 victims, husband and wife, both unresponsive when we arrived. Paramedics have been working on them for 40 minutes. It doesn't look good." "What happened?" "The daughter called 911 at 9:52 p.m. Said her parents were sick. Said her father was seizing. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, found both parents in critical condition, vomiting, seizures, respiratory distress. They suspect poisoning." "Poisoning." That's what the lead paramedic says. Symptoms are consistent with toxic exposure. They've administered activated charcoal, started IV fluids, but both victims are unresponsive now. They're being transported to Edward Hospital. "Where's the daughter?" "Kitchen. With Officer Martinez. She's 17, completely calm. Too calm, in my opinion." Sarah stepped inside. The house was immaculate, expensive furniture, hardwood floors, original artwork on the walls. The Christmas tree in the living room seemed obscene now, its cheerful lights blinking in rhythm, while paramedics performed CPR on the living room floor. Sarah watched for a moment. The male victim lay on his back, a paramedic straddling him, performing chest compressions with mechanical precision. The female victim lay near the bathroom, another paramedic managing her airway with a bag valve mask. Both victims were ashen, their lips tinged blue. Detective Rivera, the lead paramedic, a woman named Jessica Thornton, looked up. Sarah had worked with her on previous calls. "We need to transport immediately. This is bad." "What are we looking at?" "Poisoning is my best guess. Both patients presenting identically, vomiting, confusion, seizures, respiratory arrest. Same timeline of symptom onset. Whatever they ingested together." "Food poisoning?" "No. This is acute toxic exposure. Possibly something in their food or drinks. But this isn't bacterial. This is chemical." "Are they going to make it?" Jessica's expression was answer enough. "We'll do everything we can." The paramedics loaded David and Catherine Harper onto gurneys and wheeled them out to the ambulances. Sarah watched them go, their bodies limp and lifeless beneath white sheets, their faces hidden behind oxygen masks. Then she turned to Officer Chen. "Seal the house. This is a crime scene now. Nobody touches anything. I want photos of everything, every room, every surface, every item of food and drink." "You think this was intentional?" "I think 2 healthy people don't simultaneously go into respiratory arrest from food poisoning on Christmas Eve. Get me a crime scene unit, and get me that daughter." Sarah walked into the kitchen. It was a chef's kitchen, granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, a Sub-Zero refrigerator, a 6-burner Wolf range. A young woman sat at the kitchen island, her hands folded on the marble countertop, her posture perfect. She wore black leggings and a gray Northwestern sweatshirt. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked up as Sarah entered. Her expression was disturbingly composed. "Natalie Harper?" Sarah asked. "Yes. I'm Detective Sarah Rivera with the Naperville Police Department. I need to ask you some questions about what happened tonight. Okay. Okay. Sarah pulled out a chair and sat across from Natalie. She studied the girl's face, looking for signs of distress, shock, fear, grief, anything. She saw nothing. Just calm. Just control. Can you tell me what happened? Natalie's account was precise and detailed, delivered in a steady voice without emotion. She described making dinner, prime rib, vegetables, eggnog. She described eating with her parents, moving to the living room. Her mother's first complaint of illness around 8:15 p.m. Her father's symptoms beginning shortly after. She explained that she had called 911 initially, but hung up when her parents said they felt better. Then, when her father began seizing, she had called again. What did you eat tonight? Sarah asked. Prime rib, Brussels sprouts, mashed potatoes, rolls. The same thing they ate. And you're not sick? No. Horrified. Did you drink anything besides water? I made eggnog. It's a family tradition. They drank theirs. I didn't finish mine. Why not? A pause. Barely noticeable, but Sarah caught it. I was full after dinner. Where's your eggnog now? I poured it down the sink. Sarah nodded slowly, her instincts screaming. Natalie, I need you to stay here in the kitchen with Officer Martinez. Don't go anywhere else in the house. We're going to need to examine everything, and I'll want to talk to you more. Is that okay? Of course. Do you have family we can call? Grandparents, aunts, or uncles? My father's brother lives in Seattle. Uncle Richard. We'll contact him. In the meantime, is there a friend's house you can go to tonight? You shouldn't be alone. I can stay here. This is a crime scene now, Natalie. You can't stay here. A crime scene. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Natalie's face. Surprise? Concern? It was gone too quickly for Sarah to identify. Why? Why? Your parents' conditions are suspicious. We need to investigate. I understand. Sarah stood. She walked out of the kitchen and motioned for Officer Chen to follow her into the hallway. Get a warrant, Sarah said quietly. I want this entire house searched. I want every item of food and drink tested. I want that girl's phone and laptop seized, and I want to know where that eggnog went. You think the daughter did this? I think something's very wrong here. Two healthy people don't collapse simultaneously unless they ingested something toxic. And that girl just told me she made them drinks, didn't drink her own, and poured the evidence down the sink. Jesus. Get the warrant. We're going to need it. No. At 12:47 a.m. on Christmas morning, David Harper was pronounced dead at Edward Hospital. His wife, Catherine, died 90 minutes later at 2:17 a.m. The emergency room physicians had fought to save them, pumping their stomachs, administering antidotes for common poisons, running every test available. Nothing worked. The toxicology screen came back at 3:30 a.m. with the answer: ethylene glycol, antifreeze, lethal levels in both victims' blood. Sarah received the call at 3:45 a.m. She was still at the Harper house, supervising the crime scene investigation. When the toxicology results came through, everything clicked into place. Antifreeze, she said to Officer Chen. They were poisoned with antifreeze. Where would they get antifreeze? They didn't get it. Someone gave it to them. In their drinks. At 4:15 a.m., Sarah knocked on the door of the interview room where Natalie had been waiting. The girl had been transported to the police station at 2:00 a.m., told that she needed to provide a formal statement. She had agreed without protest, without asking for a lawyer, without asking what was happening. She sat in the interview room now, still wearing her Northwestern sweatshirt, her hands folded on the metal table. Natalie, Sarah said, sitting down across from her. I need to tell you something. Your parents died at the hospital. I'm very sorry. Natalie stared at Sarah for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Okay. Not what? Not how? Not no. That can't be true. Just okay. Okay? Sarah repeated. Thank you for telling me. But Sarah leaned forward. Natalie, your parents died from antifreeze poisoning. Ethylene glycol. Do you know what that is? It's the chemical in antifreeze for cars. That's right. Someone put antifreeze in their drinks. Someone poisoned them. Oh. Do you have any idea who would do that? No. Natalie, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to be honest with me. Did you put antifreeze in your parents' eggnog? Natalie looked directly at Sarah, her dark eyes unreadable. No. You're sure? I made the eggnog exactly the way my mother taught me. Eggs, cream, sugar, vanilla, nutmeg, bourbon. Nothing else. Where would someone even get antifreeze in this house? I don't know. The garage, maybe. My dad keeps car supplies in the garage. Sarah stood. We're going to search your house, Natalie. If there's antifreeze anywhere, we're going to find it. If there's any evidence that you or anyone else poisoned your parents, we're going to find it. Do you understand? Yes. Is there anything you want to tell me before we do that? No. Daro too. Sarah left the interview room and called the search team. Tear that house apart. I want every bottle, every container, every cleaning supply, every automotive product. And search the girl's bedroom. Search everywhere. The search warrant was executed at 6:00 a.m. on Christmas morning. A team of 6 officers methodically searched every room, every closet, every cabinet. They found the antifreeze at 9:17 a.m. in Natalie's bedroom closet, hidden behind a stack of folded sweaters. 2-gallon jugs of Prestone low-tox antifreeze. One was unopened. One was half empty. At 10:43 a.m., Detective Sarah Rivera knocked on the interview room door again. Natalie, she said, carrying a file folder. We need to talk. The interrogation. Full transcript. Naperville Police Department. Interrogation transcript. Date. December 25th, 2020. Time. 10:43 a.m. Location. Interview, Room 2. Subject. Natalie Ann Harper Dobb, 3/14/2003, age 17. Interviewing officer. Detective Sarah Rivera, badge hash 2847. Also present. Officer Marcus Klein. Detective Rivera enters room carrying file folder and bottle of water. Subject is seated. Hands folded on table. Video recording begins. Rivera. Good morning, Natalie. I brought you some water. Are you thirsty? Harper. No, thank you. Rivera. You've been here for a while. You must be tired. Harper. I'm okay. Rivera. Natalie, before we continue, I need to remind you that you're not under arrest. You're free to leave at any time. But I'm hoping you'll help us understand what happened to your parents. Are you willing to talk to me? Harper. Yes. Rivera. Good. I appreciate that. Opens folder. Removes photographer. Do you recognize this? Harper. You pause 4 seconds. That's antifreeze. Rivera. That's right. We found this in your bedroom closet this morning. Behind your sweaters. Can you explain why you have antifreeze in your closet? Harper. I don't know how it got there. Rivera. You don't know? Harper. No, I'll wait. Rivera. Natalie, this was hidden in your closet. Behind your clothes. You're telling me you didn't know it was there? Harper. I guess someone must have put it there. Rivera. Who? Who would put antifreeze in your closet without you knowing? Harper. I don't know. Rivera. Pause. Pulls out second photograph. This is from the AutoZone on Route 59. December 18th, 6 days ago. That's you, isn't it? Photograph shows subject at checkout counter, holding 2 jugs of antifreeze. Harper. Examines photo, 7 seconds. I bought those for my car. Rivera. Your car. Harper. I was worried about the cold weather. I thought you were supposed to add antifreeze to cars in winter. Rivera. Do you know how to add antifreeze to a car? Harper. No. but I was going to look it up online. Rivera, did you? Harper, did I what? Rivera, look it up. Learn how to add antifreeze to your car. Harper, no, I guess I forgot. Rivera, you forgot. Harper, yes. Rivera, so you bought 2 gallons of antifreeze, brought them home, put them in your closet, and then forgot about them. Harper, I guess so. Rivera, Natalie, help me understand something. You're a smart girl. Really smart. National Merit Scholar. Going to Northwestern. You understand how evidence works, right? Harper, I suppose. Rivera, so explain to me how, if you bought antifreeze for your car and forgot about it, that same antifreeze ended up in your parents' bodies. Harper, I don't know. Rivera, you don't know. Harper, I don't know how it got there. Rivera, leans forward. Natalie, your parents died this morning. They died from antifreeze poisoning. The medical examiner confirmed it. They had lethal levels of ethylene glycol in their blood. Do you understand what that means? Harper, yes. Rivera, it means someone poisoned them. Someone put antifreeze in something they drank. And we found antifreeze in your bedroom. Antifreeze that you purchased. Antifreeze that you hid. Are you understanding where I'm going with this? Harper, no response. Rivera, Natalie, we're going to test that antifreeze. We're going to compare its chemical signature to the ethylene glycol in your parents' blood. We're going to test the eggnog pitcher for residue. We're going to analyze your phone and laptop. If there's any evidence, any Google searches about poisoning, any messages about planning this, any research about antifreeze, we are going to find it. Do you understand? Harper, yes. Rivera, so I'm giving you an opportunity right now, right here, right now, to tell me your side of the story. Because once this becomes a formal murder investigation, once we get all that evidence analyzed, once the prosecutor gets involved, I can't help you anymore. This is your chance. Do you want to take it? Harper, we pause. 11 seconds. I want a lawyer. Rivera, you're sure? Because, Harper, I want a lawyer. Rivera, okay. That's your right. Interview is terminated at 11:02 a.m. Stand, someone will contact the public defender's office for you. Detective Rivera exits. Recording continues for 3 minutes, showing subject sitting motionless. No visible emotion. The digital evidence. 247 searches. The forensic examination of Natalie Harper's devices began immediately. FBI Special Agent Melissa Cartwright, a digital forensics expert with 15 years of experience, led the analysis. What she found over the next 72 hours would build a prosecution case so overwhelming that even the defense would struggle to refute it. Natalie had attempted to cover her tracks. She had used private browsing mode for most of her searches. She had deleted her browser history multiple times. She had even searched for "Can police recover deleted search history?" and "How long does digital forensics take?" What Natalie didn't understand was that private browsing only prevents the browser from saving local history. It doesn't prevent the hard drive from maintaining records of data access, temporary file creation, and system log. Agent Cartwright used forensic software to reconstruct Natalie's complete digital footprint going back 6 months. The search history told a chilling story of premeditation. September 2020. Initial research phase. Sep 12, 10:47 p.m. Untraceable poison. Sep 12, 11:03 p.m. Poisons that look like natural death. Sep 15, 9:32 p.m. How to poison someone without getting caught. Sep 15, 9:51 p.m. What poison is hardest to detect? Sept 18, 8:15 p.m. Household items that are poisonous. Sept 22, 7:44 p.m. Ethylene glycol, poisoning symptoms. Sept 22, 8:02 p.m. How long does antifreeze take to kill someone? Sept 25, 10:18 p.m. Famous poisoning cases. Sept 29, 11:23 p.m. How much antifreeze to kill adult? October 2020. Detailed planning phase. Oct 3rd 9:47 p.m. Does antifreeze have a taste? Oct 3rd 9:53 p.m. What does antifreeze taste like? Oct 3 10:11 p.m. How to mask taste of antifreeze. Oct 8:34 p.m. How long does ethylene glycol take to kill? Oct 8:41 p.m. Ethylene glycol poisoning stages. Oct 12 7:52 p.m. Antifreeze poisoning symptoms timeline. Oct 15 10:05 p.m. Can you survive antifreeze poisoning? Oct 15 10:17 p.m. How much antifreeze is lethally? Oct 19 9:28 p.m. Do hospitals test for antifreeze poisoning? Oct 22nd 8:03 p.m. Antifreeze murder cases. Oct 22nd 8:19 p.m. Lynn Turner antifreeze murder. Oct 22nd 8:44 p.m. How did Lynn Turner get caught? Oct 26 10:33 p.m. Antifreeze murder detection. Oct 29th 7:16 p.m. How to hide antifreeze in food. Oct 29th 7:31 p.m. Sweet drinks to hide poison. November 2020. Inheritance research phase. Nov 5 8:41 p.m. Illinois inheritance law for minors. Nov 5 8:55 p.m. Can a 17-year-old inherit money? Nov 5 9:12 p.m. Do minors need guardian to inherit? Non 7 48 p.m. Executor of Estate Duties, Illinois. Nov 12 10:22 p.m. Do you need parents' permission to inherit? Nov 12 10:38 p.m. Who inherits if parents die together? Nov 15 9:07 p.m. Life insurance payout to minor. Nov 19 8:54 p.m. How much money do most people inherit? 19 9:11 p.m. Average inheritance amount USA. Nov 23 7:33 p.m. Do police check computer in murder investigation? December 2020. Cover-up research phase. Nov 25 10:47 p.m. Can police recover deleted search history? Nov 28 8:19 p.m. How to permanently delete browsing history. Dec 1 9:35 p.m. Best way to delete internet history. Dec 1 9:42 p.m. Does private browsing leave traces? Dec 5 7:51 p.m. Digital forensics. What can they find? Dec 8 10:14 p.m. How long does digital forensics take? Dec 12 8:27 p.m. FBI computer forensics method. Dec 15 7:03 p.m. Christmas eggnog recipe. Dec 15 7:18 p.m. Bourbon eggnog recipe. Dec 18 2:37 p.m. Where to buy antifreeze near me. Dec 18 2:41 p.m. AutoZone Route 59, Naperville hours. 247 total searches related to poisoning, murder, inheritance, and covering up crime. All conducted between September 12th and December 18th, 2020. All saved on the hard drive despite Natalie's attempts to delete them. But the digital evidence didn't stop there. Agent Cartwright also recovered Natalie's Notes app entries. On December 24, 2020, at 7:15 p.m., just minutes before dinner, Natalie had written a detailed entry titled Inheritance Calculator. The entry read, Wadur, Vesrai, Radidion. Investment accounts, Merrill Lynch, $1,247,000. Home equity, Zillow estimate, $847,000. Life insurance, Dad's policy, $400,000. Life insurance, Mom's policy, $200,000. Dad's $401K. $126,000. Mom's $401K, $57,000. Savings accounts, $183,000. College fund, $380,000, already designated for me. Bonds, other, $243,000. Total, $3,683,000. Minus estate taxes estimated 18%, $663,000. Net inheritance, $3,020,000. Uncle Richard, executor but can't touch principal per dad's will. All assets transfer to trust for my benefit. Available immediately for college expenses. Full control at age 21. Northwestern tuition, covered by scholarship. Living expenses, I'd $25 a year, Calcor $100 for 4 years. Remaining at 21. $82.90 Freedom, priceless. The final word freedom would be entered as evidence at trial and would appear on news websites around the world. Agent Cartwright also recovered text message exchanges between Natalie and her best friend, Riley Martinez. November 3, 2020, 9:47 p.m. Natalie, I can't do 4 more years of this. Riley, 4 years of what? Natalie, college. My parents. It's just going to be high school all over again. More pressure, more expectations, more you need to be perfect. Riley, can't you just move out after graduation? Get your own place. Natalie, not if they're controlling the money. And they will be. Full control. Riley, that sucks. But it's only 4 years. Natalie, 4 years is forever. December 10th, 2020, 10:33 p.m. Natalie, do you ever wish you could just start over? Completely fresh start? No parents, no expectations, just freedom to be whoever you want. Riley, lull all the time. Why, you okay? Natalie, yeah, just tired of everything. Riley, your parents being intense again? Natalie, always. It never stops. December 20th, 2020, 11:18 p.m. Natalie, what are you doing for Christmas? Riley, same as every year. Dinner at my grandma's on Christmas Eve. Open presents Christmas morning. Eat leftovers. Be bored. You? Do? Natalie, family dinner, Christmas Eve. Probably the last one. Riley, last one. Why? Natalie, just a feeling. Riley, that's weird. You're being weird. Natalie, sorry. Just stressed about finals. Riley, finals aren't for 3 weeks. Natalie, I know. I'm always stressed. Riley Martinez would testify at trial that she didn't understand what Natalie meant by probably the last one until after the murders. Then it became horrifyingly clear. The digital evidence was damning. It showed months of planning. It showed research into methods and dosages. It showed calculation of financial gain. It showed consciousness of guilt in attempting to cover tracks. Combined with the physical evidence, the antifreeze in Natalie's closet, the surveillance footage from AutoZone, the toxicology confirming ethylene glycol, poisoning, the prosecution had an overwhelming case. On December 27, 2020, 3 days after the murders, Natalie Harper was arrested at her uncle's home in Seattle, where she had been sent to stay with family. She was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and extradited back to Illinois. Because she was 17 at the time of the murders, there was a question of whether she would be tried as a juvenile or an adult. The state filed a motion to try her as an adult, arguing that the severity of the crimes and the clear evidence of premeditation warranted adult prosecution. After a 2-day hearing in January 2021, Judge Harold Wexler ruled that Natalie Harper would be tried as an adult. She was held without bail at the Kane County Juvenile Justice Center while awaiting trial. Her public defender, Robert Castellano, began building his defense. But he knew the truth. The evidence against his client was overwhelming. His only hope was to humanize her, to make the jury see her as a damaged child rather than a cold-blooded killer. The trial was set for November 8, 2021. Both sides spent the next 10 months preparing for battle. The trial begins November 8, 2021. The DuPage County Courthouse in Wheaton, Illinois, is a dignified limestone structure built in 1938, a monument to Depression-era architecture and the enduring concept of justice. On the morning of November 8, 2021, a line of spectators, journalists, true crime enthusiasts, and curious citizens stretched around the block, all hoping for a seat in courtroom 4C, where the trial of Natalie Harper would begin. The case had dominated local and national news for nearly a year. A teenage girl, a wealthy suburban family, Christmas Eve, poisoned eggnog. The story had every element that captures public fascination: privilege, betrayal, family destruction, and the unsettling question of whether a child could be truly evil. Cable news networks had sent correspondents. Podcasters recorded episodes from the courthouse steps. A dozen editorial writers had weighed in on whether teenagers should ever receive life sentences, whether this was a case of nature or nurture, whether the parents bore responsibility for creating a monster. Judge Patricia Faulkner had implemented strict courtroom protocols. No phones, no recording devices, no outbursts. She had also granted the defense's motion to exclude cameras from the courtroom, believing they would turn the proceedings into a circus. Sketch artists would have to suffice. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, the bailiff called the courtroom to order. All rise. The Circuit Court of the 18th Judicial Circuit, DuPage County, Illinois, is now in session, the Honorable Patricia Faulkner presiding. Judge Faulkner entered through the door behind the bench. She was 58 years old, with steel gray hair pulled back in a bun, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a reputation for running a tight courtroom. She had been a prosecutor for 15 years before being appointed to the bench, and she had presided over some of the county's most complex criminal trials. She did not tolerate incompetence, and she did not tolerate theatrics. "Please be seated," she said, taking her seat at the bench. "We're here for the matter of the people of the state of Illinois versus Natalie Ann Harper, case number 2020 CF 3847. Will counsel please state their appearances for the record?" From the prosecution table, a woman in a navy blue suit stood. Margaret Chen was 48 years old, a career prosecutor who had tried over 60 murder cases and lost only 3 GRI. She was known for her methodical approach, her mastery of evidence, and her ability to connect with jury. She was not flashy, but she was devastatingly effective. "Margaret Chen for the people, Your Honor." From the defense table, a young man in a gray suit stood. Robert Castellano was 31, a public defender who had been practicing criminal law for only 6 years. This was his first capital murder trial, and he looked nervous. But his voice was steady. "Robert Castellano for the defendant, Your Honor." Natalie Harper sat beside her attorney at the defense table. She wore a white blouse and a black skirt, her lawyer's choice, designed to make her look young and vulnerable. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry. She looked like what she was, a teenage girl. But her expression was the same eerie calm that had unsettled Detective Rivera on Christmas Eve. No fear, no anxiety, just stillness. "Very well," Judge Faulkner said. "Before we bring in the jury pool for voir dire, I want to address both counsel. This case has received extraordinary media attention. I expect professional conduct from both sides at all times. This is a courtroom, not a stage. Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Honor," both attorneys said. "Good. I will not tolerate grandstanding. I will not tolerate speaking objections, and I will not tolerate any behavior that turns these proceedings into entertainment. We are here to determine guilt or innocence based on evidence and law. Nothing more. Are we clear? Are we clear?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Excellent. Bailiff, bring in the jury pool." Jury selection, voir dire. Jury selection voir dire, from the French to speak the truth, is the process by which attorneys question potential jurors to determine their suitability for service. In a murder trial, it is arguably the most important phase. The 12 people selected will hold absolute power over the defendant's fate. For the Harper trial, 90 potential jurors had been summoned. They filed into the courtroom in groups of 20, filling the gallery seats, eyeing the defendant with open curiosity. Judge Faulkner addressed them first, explaining the charges, the process, the time commitment required. "This trial is expected to last 3 weeks," she said. "If you cannot commit to that time, or if you have a hardship that would prevent you from serving, please raise your hand now." 15 people raised their hands. The judge interviewed each privately, excusing 9 for legitimate hardships, medical issues, caregiving responsibilities, financial hardship. Then, the questioning began. Margaret Chen approached the jury box first. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Margaret Chen, and I represent the people of the state of Illinois. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. There are no right or wrong answers. I just need to understand how you think. Let's start with a simple question. How many of you have teenagers at home?" 11 hands went up. "Thank you. Now, for those of you with teenagers, and I know this is difficult to imagine, could you be impartial in a case where a teenager is accused of murdering her parents? Could you set aside your natural empathy for a child and focus solely on the evidence?" Several jurors nodded. 2 looked uncertain. Chen focused on one of them, a woman in her mid-40s. "Ma'am, you looked hesitant. Can you tell me what you're thinking?" The woman shifted uncomfortably. I have a 17-year-old daughter, and I can't imagine. I don't think I could be objective. I appreciate your honesty. Thank you." Chen made a note. She would challenge this juror. She continued, "How many of you believe that teenagers are fundamentally different from adults, that their brains aren't fully developed, that they can't fully understand consequence?" 8 hands went up. "Thank you for your honesty. Now let me ask you this. If the evidence shows that a teenager planned a crime for months, researched methods, purchased materials in advance, and then executed the plan, does that change your view? Does planning indicate adult-level thinking?" The hands wavered. Some came down. Some stayed up. Chen was identifying the jurors who would be sympathetic to the defense's argument about adolescent brain development. She would challenge them. After 2 hours, Chen had identified her ideal jurors, people who believed in personal responsibility, who were not swayed by age-based sympathy, who trusted evidence over emotion. Then, it was Robert Castellano's turn. He approached the jury box with a gentler demeanor than Chen. "Good morning, everyone. I know you've been sitting here for a while, and I appreciate your patience. I'm going to ask some different questions. First, how many of you have ever felt overwhelmed by pressure? Pressure from parents, from work, from society's expectations?" Every hand went up. "Thank you. We've all felt that. Now, how many of you believe that constant, unrelenting pressure, especially on a child, can lead to a breaking point?" Most hands stayed up. "Good. That's important. Because this case is about a child who broke. Now, I need to ask, how many of you could consider a verdict other than first-degree murder if the evidence shows that this was not cold-blooded calculation, but rather a child in crisis?" Several hands went up. Chen made notes. She would challenge these jurors. The process continued for 3 full days. Potential jurors were questioned about their views on the death penalty. Illinois had abolished it, but the question revealed their attitudes toward punishment. They were asked about their consumption of true crime media. They were asked whether they believed people could be rehabilitated or whether some crimes were unforgivable. Each attorney was allowed 10 peremptory challenges, the ability to dismiss a juror without explanation, and unlimited challenges for cause, where they had to prove the juror could not be impartial. Margaret Chen used 8 of her peremptory challenges to remove jurors who expressed strong sympathy for troubled teenagers or who had teenagers of their own. She challenged for cause anyone who said they could not impose a severe sentence on a 17-year-old. Robert Castellano used all 10 of his peremptory challenges to remove jurors who worked in law enforcement, who had been victims of violent crime, or who expressed rigid views about personal responsibility. By November 11, 2021, they had their jury. The jury: Juror #1, Thomas Delgado, 54th, accountant, married, 2 adult children. Methodical thinker. Selected as foreperson. By Juror #2, Eleanor Ross, 67, retired high school English teacher. Empathetic, but believes in accountability. Juror #3, David Park, 31st, software engineer, single. Logical, evidence-focused. Juror #4, Michelle Torres, 42, real estate agent, divorced, 1 teenage son. Initially hesitant, but said she could be impartial. Juror #5, Kenneth Yamamoto, 58, postal worker, married. Quiet, observant. Juror #6, Rebecca Lawson, 28, graphic designer, engaged. Interested in psychology. Juror #7, Caroline Stroud, 45, registered nurse, married, 3 children. Medical background, used to making life and death decisions. Juror #8, James Morrison, 39, grocery store manager. Practical, no nonsense. Juror #9, Lisa Freeman, 36, stay-at-home parent, married, 2 young children. The most sympathetic to the defense. Juror #10, Angela Reeves, 52, librarian, single daughter. Well-read, thoughtful. Juror #11, Marcus Jenkins, 44, electrician, married, 1 teenage daughter. Initially skeptical of troubled teen narrative. Juror #12, Susan Palmer, 61, retired sales manager, grandmother of 4 children. Values family. 2 alternates were also selected in case any juror had to be excused during trial. Judge Faulkner swore them in. Members of the jury, you have been selected to serve in this case. You are now the judges of the facts. You will listen to the evidence, evaluate the credibility of witnesses, and ultimately decide whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty of the charges against her. You must set aside any biases, any preconceptions, any sympathies, and decide this case based solely. We do, they answered in unison. Very well. We will begin opening statements tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Natalie Harper was led back to her cell. The jurors filed out, each carrying the weight of what they had just agreed to do. Decide whether a 17-year-old girl would spend the rest of her life in prison. Opening statements. On November 12, 2021, at 9:15 a.m., the trial proper began. The courtroom was packed. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Sketch artists sat in the first row, pencils poised. The families of David and Catherine Harper, brothers, sisters, cousins, colleagues filled the left side of the gallery. The right side held journalists and spectators who had lined up at 5 a.m. to secure seats. Judge Faulkner addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to hear opening statements from both sides. I want to remind you that opening statements are not evidence. They are simply each attorney's preview of what they believe the evidence will show. You should listen carefully, but you must base your verdict only on the evidence presented during the trial, not on what the attorneys say in their opening statements. Is that clear? The jurors nodded. Very well. Ms. Chen, you may proceed. Margaret Chen stood and walked slowly to the jury box. She wore a navy suit, minimal jewelry, no-nonsense demeanor. She made eye contact with each juror before she began speaking. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, on Christmas Eve, 2020, David and Catherine Harper sat down to dinner with their 17-year-old daughter, Natalie. They ate prime rib. They drank eggnog. They moved to the living room to read Charles Dickens together, a family tradition they had maintained for years. And by 2:17 a.m. on Christmas morning, they were both dead, poisoned, murdered by their own daughter. Over the next 2 weeks, I am going to present you with evidence that proves, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Natalie Harper murdered her parents. Not in a moment of passion, not in self-defense, not because she was mentally ill or out of control. She murdered them because she wanted their money, and she wanted her freedom, and she was willing to kill to get both. The evidence will show you that starting in September of 2023, months before the murders, Natalie Harper began researching poisons. She didn't search for this information once or twice. She searched 247 times. 247 searches related to poisoning, murder, and covering up murder. She searched for untraceable poisons. She searched for how to poison someone without getting caught. She searched for how much antifreeze to kill an adult. She searched for, does antifreeze have a taste? She searched for how to hide antifreeze in food. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't research for a school project. This was planning. This was premeditation. The evidence will show you that on December 18, 2020, 6 days before Christmas, Natalie Harper drove to an AutoZone store on Route 59. You will see surveillance footage of her purchasing 2 gallons of Prestone low-tox antifreeze. The store manager will testify that she paid in cash, which was unusual, that she seemed nervous, that she didn't want to be noticed. Why would a 17-year-old girl buy antifreeze? The defense will try to tell you it was for her car. But you will hear testimony that Natalie Harper does not know how to add antifreeze to a car. She never looked it up. She never tried to learn. She bought that antifreeze for one reason: to kill her parents. The evidence will show you that on Christmas Eve, Natalie Harper made the family's traditional eggnog. She followed her grandmother's recipe. She added bourbon to her parents' portions. She grated fresh nutmeg on top, and she added 120 milliliters of antifreeze to each cup, a lethal dose. The evidence will show you that her parents drank that eggnog. Within 45 minutes, they began to feel sick. Nausea, dizziness, confusion. Their bodies were being poisoned from the inside. Ethylene glycol, the active ingredient in antifreeze, was metabolizing into toxic acids that were crystallizing in their kidneys, shutting down their organs, killing them cell by cell. Harper died at 1:33 a.m. Catherine Harper died 44 minutes later. The medical examiner will tell you that they died in agony. That ethylene glycol poisoning is one of the most painful ways to die. And what was Natalie doing while her parents were dying? She was watching. She called 911 once, then hung up because she didn't want help to arrive too soon. She only called again when her father started seizing, because she needed to look like she had tried to help. When Detective Sarah Rivera informed Natalie that her parents had died, do you know what she said? She said, "Okay." Not what? Not how? Not no. That can't be true. Just okay. No tears. No shock. No emotion. Just calm acceptance. The evidence will show you that Natalie Harper stood to inherit nearly $3 million upon her parents' deaths. You will see a note on her phone, written on the day of the murders, calculating her inheritance down to the dollar. You will see that she wrote the word freedom at the bottom of that calculation. The evidence will show you that when police searched Natalie's bedroom, they found the antifreeze, the same antifreeze she purchased on December 18th, hidden in her closet behind her clothes. The evidence will show you that the chemical signature of that antifreeze matches the ethylene glycol found in her parents' body. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a complicated case. This is not a case where we have to guess about what happened. We know exactly what happened. Natalie Harper planned these murders for 3 months. She researched methods. She purchased materials. She calculated her inheritance. And on Christmas Eve, she put her plan into action. The defense is going to try to make you feel sorry for Natalie. They're going to tell you she was under pressure. They're going to tell you she was depressed. They're going to tell you that teenagers' brains aren't fully developed. But I'm going to ask you to focus on the evidence. Because the evidence shows premeditation. The evidence shows calculation. The evidence shows a person who knew exactly what she was doing and did it anyway. At the end of this trial, after you've heard all the evidence, I'm going to ask you to return the only verdict that the evidence supports. Guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Thank you. Chen returned to her seat. The courtroom was silent. Several jurors looked pale. 2 were staring at Natalie, who sat motionless at the defense table, her expression unchanged. Judge Faulkner turned to the defense. Mr. Castellano, your opening statement. Robert Castellano stood. He looked young and nervous as he approached the jury box, but his voice was steady and sincere. Ladies and gentlemen, everything the prosecutor just told you is true. Natalie Harper did research poisons online. She did buy antifreeze. She did make the eggnog that her parents drank. She did stand to inherit their money. All of those facts are true. But the question you have to answer in this case is not just what happened. The question you have to answer is why. Because Ms. Chen wants you to believe that this was about greed. She wants you to believe that a 17-year-old girl, a National Merit Scholar, a girl who had just been accepted to Northwestern University with a full scholarship, threw away her entire life for money that she wouldn't even be able to access for 4 more years. Does that make sense to you? Think about it. If Natalie wanted money, why would she commit a crime that was so obviously traceable? Why would she do Google searches that could be recovered? Why would she buy antifreeze on surveillance cameras? Why would she hide the evidence in her own closet? If Natalie Harper is the cold, calculating killer the prosecution wants you to believe she is, she would have covered her tracks better. But she didn't. And that's because this wasn't calculation. This was a child in crisis. The evidence will show you, and I mean real, credible evidence from medical professionals, that Natalie Harper suffered from depression and severe anxiety for years. She was raised in a household where love was conditional, where her worth as a human being depended on her grades, her test scores, her achievements. You will hear from a clinical psychologist who evaluated Natalie. She will tell you that Natalie has complex post-traumatic stress disorder, that she experienced chronic emotional neglect, that she developed a condition called learned helplessness, where she felt there was no escape from the pressure she was under. You will hear from her school counselor, who recommended therapy for Natalie. Her parents didn't follow through. You will hear from a psychiatrist who will explain that adolescent brains are not fully developed, that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for impulse control and understanding long-term consequences, doesn't finish developing until the mid-20s. Now, does any of this excuse what Natalie did? No. Does it mean she's not responsible? No. But it means this case is more complicated than the prosecution wants you to believe. This is not a cold-blooded murder. This is a tragedy. This is what happens when we push children beyond their breaking point and then ignore the warning signs. Natalie Harper is not a monster. She is a child who broke under unbearable pressure. And while she must be held accountable for what she did, she also deserves our understanding, our compassion, and our mercy. At the end of this trial, I'm going to ask you to return a verdict that acknowledges the complexity of this case, that acknowledges that a 17-year-old child is not the same as a 40-year-old adult, that acknowledges that mental illness and trauma are real. Thank you. Castellano returned to his seat. The jury looked conflicted. Some nodded. Some looked skeptical. Some glanced at Natalie with what might have been sympathy. Judge Faulkner checked her watch. We'll take a 15-minute recess, and then the prosecution will call its first witness. The jurors filed out. The courtroom erupted in whispered conversations. Journalists scribbled notes. Sketch artists finished their drawings of the defendant. Natalie Harper sat motionless, staring at nothing. In 15 minutes, the real battle would begin. The prosecution's case, witness testimony. Over the next 7 days, Margaret Chen methodically built her case, witness by witness, piece of evidence by piece of evidence. She presented 19 witnesses in total. What follows are the most critical testimonies, presented in full question and answer format. Witness #1. Detective Sarah Rivera. Detective Rivera took the stand at 10:00 a.m. on November 12, 2021. She wore her dress uniform dark blue with badge and insignia. She had testified in court dozens of times, and she was comfortable under scrutiny. Chen, please state your name and occupation for the record. Rivera. Sarah Rivera. I'm a detective with the Naperville Police Department. I've been a detective for 6 years and a police officer for 17 years total. Chen, were you the lead detective on the investigation into the deaths of David and Catherine Harper? Rivera. Yes, I was. Chen, can you tell the jury how you became involved in this case? Rivera. I received a call from dispatch at approximately 10:18 p.m. on December 24, 2020, Christmas Eve. I was informed that there was a possible double homicide at 2847 Oakmont Drive in the Ashbury Heights subdivision. When I arrived, paramedics were treating 2 victims who were in critical condition. Chen, what did you observe when you arrived? Rivera. The scene was chaotic. There were 2 ambulances, multiple patrol cars, a fire truck. Inside the residence, I saw 2 victims, a male and a female, both on the floor, both receiving CPR from paramedics. The lead paramedic informed me that she suspected poisoning based on the symptoms: vomiting, seizures, respiratory distress. Chen, what did you do next? Rivera. I spoke with the first responding officers to understand what had happened. Then I went to the kitchen to interview the daughter, Natalie Harper, who had called 911. Chen, can you describe that interview? Rivera. Natalie was sitting at the kitchen island with Officer Martinez. She was 17 years old, calm, composed. I asked her to tell me what had happened. She gave me a very detailed account of the evening, what they ate for dinner, what they drank, when her parents first became ill, when she called 911. Chen, how would you describe her demeanor? Castellano. Objection. Calls for speculation about the witness's subjective interpretation. Judge Faulkner. Overruled. Detective Rivera can describe what she observed. Rivera. Her demeanor was unusually calm. I've been in law enforcement for 17 years. I've interviewed hundreds of people in crisis situations. When someone's parents are dying or have just died, there's typically shock, panic, crying, denial. Natalie showed none of that. She was composed, almost detached. Chen, did she tell you what she had eaten and drunk that evening? Rivera. Yes. She said she had eaten the same dinner as her parents' prime rib, vegetables, potatoes. She said she had made eggnog, that her parents drank theirs, but she didn't finish hers. Chen, did you ask her where her eggnog was? Rivera. Yes. She said she had poured it down the sink. Chen, what happened next? Rivera. The victims were transported to Edward Hospital. I remained at the scene with the crime scene unit to begin processing the house. At approximately 3:45 a.m., I received a call from the hospital informing me that both victims had died and that toxicology results showed ethylene glycol poisoning antifreeze. Chen, what did you do with that information? Rivera. I obtained a search warrant for the residence. We conducted a comprehensive search of the entire house. At approximately 9:17 a.m. on Christmas morning, officers found 2-gallon jugs of antifreeze in Natalie Harper's bedroom closet, hidden behind folded sweaters. One jug was full. One was half empty. Chen, what did you do next? Rivera. I interviewed Natalie again. I showed her a photograph of the antifreeze and asked her to explain why it was in her closet. She initially said she didn't know how it got there. When I showed her surveillance footage of her purchasing antifreeze at AutoZone 6 days earlier, she changed her story and said she had bought it for her car. Chen, did you believe that? Castellano. Objection. Calls for the witness's personal belief, not facts. Judge Faulkner. Sustained. Chen, detective, based on your training and experience, Is it common for people to store automotive antifreeze in their bedroom closet? Rivera. No, Dawal. Automotive products are typically stored in garages or utility areas, not bedrooms, and certainly not hidden behind clothing. Chen. What happened at the end of that interview? Rivera. Natalie Harper invoked her right to an attorney, and the interview was terminated. Chen. Detective Rivera. When you informed Natalie Harper that her parents had died, how did she respond? Rivera. She said, "Okay." Chen. Just okay? Rivera. Yes. No tears, no shock, no question. Just okay. Chen. In your 17 years of law enforcement, have you ever seen that response before, when informing someone of a loved one's death? Rivera. No one here. Never. And we one more. Part of which. Chen. Thank you, Detective. No further questions. Judge Faulkner. Mr. Castellano, your witness. Robert Castellano approached the witness stand for cross-examination. Castellano. Detective Rivera. You testified that Natalie was unusually calm when you interviewed her. Isn't it true that people respond to trauma in different ways? Rivera. Yes, that's true. Castellano. Some people cry, some people scream, some people shut down emotionally. Correct? Rivera. Correct. Dit. Wall. Castellano. So the absence of visible emotion doesn't necessarily indicate guilt, does it? Rivera. Not by itself, no. Castellano. You also testified that Natalie told you she made eggnog and didn't finish hers. Did you consider the possibility that she simply wasn't thirsty? Rivera. I considered all possibilities. Castellano. But you focused on the theory that she didn't drink it because she knew it was poisoned, correct? Rivera. The evidence supported that theory. Castellano. But my question is about what you assumed before you had evidence. You assumed guilt based on her behavior, didn't you? Rivera. I followed the evidence wherever it led. Castellano. Detective, when you searched Natalie's room and found antifreeze in her closet, did you find any containers with her fingerprints on them? Any funnels? Any measuring cups? Any physical evidence that she had used that antifreeze? Rivera. Her fingerprints were on the antifreeze jugs. Castellano. Because she purchased them. But did you find any evidence that she had opened them, poured from them, or used them in any way? Rivera. The fact that one jug was half empty indicates it had been used. Castellano. But you don't know who used it, do you? Rivera. The totality of the evidence points to Natalie Harper. Castellano. That's your opinion. But my question is about physical evidence. You didn't find a funnel with antifreeze residue, did you? Rivera. No, we are not. Castellano. You didn't find any containers with antifreeze residue in Natalie's room, did you? Rivera. No, but she could have washed them. Castellano. Could have. But you don't know that she did, do you? Rivera. The digital evidence and surveillance footage corroborate. Castellano. Please answer my question, Detective. You don't have physical evidence of Natalie handling antifreeze beyond purchasing it, do you? Rivera. Not beyond the purchase, no. Well. Castellano. Thank you. No further questions. Judge Faulkner, the witness may step down. Miss Chen, call your next witness. Witness #3. Dr. Martin Chen, medical examiner. Dr. Chen was the chief medical examiner for DuPage County. He had performed over 3,000 autopsies in his 20-year career. He took the stand at 2:00 p.m. on November 13. Chen, prosecutor. Dr. Chen, did you perform the autopsies on David and Catherine Harper? Dr. Chen. Yes, I did. Chen, can you explain to the jury what you found? Dr. Chen. Both victims died from ethylene glycol poisoning. Ethylene glycol is the primary ingredient in automotive antifreeze. When ingested, it metabolizes in the body into glycolic acid and oxalic acid. These acids cause severe metabolic acidosis, kidney failure, and ultimately death. Chen. How much ethylene glycol was in their systems? Dr. Chen. David Harper had a blood ethylene glycol concentration of 220 milligrams per deciliter. Catherine Harper had 215 milligrams per deciliter. For context, levels above 20 milligrams per deciliter are considered toxic. Levels above 50 are potentially fatal. These were extraordinarily high concentrations. Chen. Based on those levels, can you estimate how much antifreeze each victim ingested? Dr. Chen. Based on their body weights and the concentrations found, I estimate each victim ingested approximately 110 to 130 milliliters of antifreeze. Chen. What would that amount look like? Dr. Chen. Approximately half a cup. Chen. Dr. Chen. Can you describe the effects of ethylene glycol poisoning? Dr. Chen. Ethylene glycol poisoning occurs in 3 stages. Stage 1, occurring within 30 minutes to 12 hours after ingestion, involves nausea, vomiting, and central nervous system depression, dizziness, confusion, slurred speech. Stage 2, occurring 12 to 24 hours after ingestion, involves metabolic acidosis, tachycardia, and hyperventilation as the body tries to compensate. Stage 3, occurring 24 to 72 hours after ingestion, involves kidney failure, seizures, and death. Chen. Did David and Catherine Harper experience all 3 stages? Dr. Chen. Based on the timeline of their symptoms and the autopsy findings, yes. They progressed through all 3 stages, though the high concentration they ingested accelerated the process. They died within 6 hours of ingestion. Chen. Dr. Chen. I need to ask you a difficult question. Is death from ethylene glycol poisoning painful? Dr. Chen. Yes. Extremely painful. The victims would have experienced severe abdominal pain, burning sensations, difficulty breathing, seizures, and ultimately, organ failure. They would have been conscious for much of it, aware that something catastrophic was happening. Chen. Thank you, doctor. No further question. The cross-examination by Castellano was brief. There was no disputing the cause of death. Witness #5. FBI Special Agent Melissa Cartwright. Digital Forensics. Agent Cartwright took the stand on November 15th. She had brought her laptop, which was connected to a screen visible to the jury. Chen. Agent Cartwright, what is your area of expertise? Cartwright. I'm a digital forensics analyst with the FBI. I specialize in recovering and analyzing digital evidence from computers, phones, and other devices. Chen. Did you examine Natalie Harper's laptop and phone? Cartwright. Yes, I did. Chen. What did you find? Cartwright. I found 247 searches related to poisoning, murder, and covering up crimes conducted between September 12 and December 18, 2020. Chen. Can you show the jury some examples? Cartwright. Displays screen. Here are searches from September. Untraceable poisons. How to poison someone without getting caught. How much antifreeze to kill adults. Here are searches from October. Does antifreeze have a taste? How to hide antifreeze in food. Here are searches from November. Illinois, inheritance law for minors. Can a 17-year-old inherit money? And here are searches from December. Can police recover deleted search history? Chen. Agent Cartwright. Did Natalie attempt to hide these searches? Cartwright. Yes. She used private browsing mode for most searches and deleted her browser history multiple times. Chen. But you were able to recover them? Cartwright. Yes. Private browsing prevents the browser from saving history locally, but it doesn't prevent the hard drive from maintaining records. We use forensic software to recover deleted data and reconstruct user activity. Chen. Did you find anything else on Natalie's devices? Cartwright. Yes. On her phone, in the Notes app, I found an entry titled Inheritance Calculator, created on December 24, 2020, at 7:15 p.m., approximately 23 minutes before the family sat down to dinner. Chen. What did that entry contain? Cartwright. A detailed list of her parents' assets, totaling over $3.60 million. She calculated estate taxes and her net inheritance. At the bottom, she wrote the word freedom. Chen. Can you show that to the jury? Cartwright. Display's image, here it is. The jury stared at the screen. Several jurors looked horrified. Chen. Thank you, Agent Cartwright. No further questions. The cross-examination again was limited. The digital evidence was devastating. The prosecution presented 13 more witnesses over the following days. The AutoZone manager who sold Natalie the antifreeze, Natalie's best friend, Riley Martinez, who testified about the text messages, teachers who testified about Natalie's demeanor, financial experts who confirmed the inheritance amount. By November 22nd, when the prosecution rested, the case seemed overwhelming. Now, it was the defense's turn. The defense's case. Robert Castellano called only 4 witnesses. He couldn't dispute the facts, so he had to change the context. Defense witness hash. 1. Dr. Helen Moss, clinical psychologist. Dr. Moss was a clinical psychologist with 30 years of experience. She had evaluated Natalie 6 times over the past year. Castellano. Dr. Moss, did you have the opportunity to evaluate Natalie Harper? Dr. Moss. Yes. I conducted 6 evaluation sessions with her between January and October of this year. Castellano. What was your diagnosis? Dr. Moss. Natalie meets the diagnostic criteria for complex post-traumatic stress disorder, major depressive disorder, and generalized anxiety disorder. Castellano. Can you explain what complex PTSD is? Dr. Moss. Complex PTSD is a condition that develops from prolonged exposure to traumatic situations, particularly situations where the person feels trapped and powerless. It's different from regular PTSD, which typically stems from a single traumatic event. Complex PTSD results from ongoing trauma, often emotional abuse, neglect, or being raised in an environment where love is conditional. Castellano. Did Natalie experience that kind of environment? Dr. Moss. Yes. Natalie was raised in a household where her worth was contingent on her achievements. Her parents loved her, but that love was conditional. She had to earn it through grades, test scores, awards. She developed what we call learned helplessness, a belief that no matter what she did, she could never escape the pressure. Castellano. Did this affect her mental state? Dr. Moss. Absolutely. By the fall of 2020, Natalie was experiencing severe depression, anxiety, and dissociative episodes. She felt trapped. She saw no way out. Castellano. Dr. Moss. In your professional opinion, was Natalie capable of forming the intent necessary for premeditated murder? Chen. Objection. That's a legal question, not a psychological one. Judge Faulkner. Sustained. Castellano. Let me rephrase. Dr. Moss, in your professional opinion, was Natalie in a mental state where she could fully appreciate the consequences of her action? Dr. Moss. I believe she was in a dissociative state. She was so overwhelmed by pressure and hopelessness that she wasn't thinking clearly. She was in crisis. Castellano. Thank you, Doctor. Margaret Chen's cross-examination was surgical. Chen. Dr. Moss, you testified that Natalie was in a dissociative state, but she was able to conduct 247 Google searches over 3 months. Does that sound like someone who's not thinking clearly? Dr. Moss. Dissociation doesn't mean complete cognitive impairment. Chen. She was able to drive to AutoZone, purchase antifreeze, hide it in her closet. Does that sound like someone who can't plan? Dr. Moss. Planning and fully understanding consequences are different. Chen. She calculated her inheritance down to the dollar. She wrote the word freedom. Does that sound like someone in a dissociative state? Or does that sound like someone who knew exactly what she was doing? Dr. Moss. You pause, both can be true. Chen. Both can be true. Thank you, doctor. No further question. Defense witness #4, Natalie Harper. The decision to put Natalie on the stand was a gamble, but Castellano believed the jury needed to hear from her, needed to see her as human. Natalie took the stand on November 29, 2021. She wore a white blouse and black skirt. Her hands trembled slightly as she was sworn in. Castellano. Natalie, can you tell the jury about your relationship with your parents? Natalie. Quiet voice. They loved me. I know they did. But their love always felt conditional, like I had to earn it by being perfect. Castellano. Can you give an example? Natalie. When I brought home a report card with all A's and one A-, my mom asked why I got the A-. When I won a writing competition, my dad asked why I was wasting time on journalism instead of focusing on something practical. It was never enough. I was never enough. Castellano. How did that make you feel? Natalie. Exhausted. Hopeless. Like no matter what I did, I'd never make them proud. And I couldn't leave. I couldn't escape. If I went to college, they'd still control the money, still have expectations. I felt trapped. Castellano. Natalie, did you research poisons online? Natalie. Yes. Castellano. Why? Natalie. I don't know. At first, it was just thoughts, imagining a way out. It wasn't a real plan. It was just escape in my head. Castellano. When did it become real? Natalie. Crying. I don't know. It's like I was watching myself from outside my body. I bought the antifreeze, but it didn't feel real. I made the eggnog, but it felt like a dream. And then they were dying, and I couldn't undo it. Castellano. Natalie. Do you regret what you did? Natalie. Sobbing every second of every day. I'd give anything to bring them back. I know I can't. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I need everyone to know I'm sorry. Castellano. Thank you, Natalie. Then Margaret Chen stood for cross-examination. Chen. Ms. Harper, you testified that researching poisons was just imagining a way out. But you researched for 3 months. That's not imagination. That's planning, isn't it? Natalie, I wasn't thinking clearly. Chen, you calculated your inheritance. You wrote freedom. That requires clear thinking, doesn't it? Natalie, I guess, but... Chen, Ms. Harper, you purchased antifreeze 6 days before you used it. You had 6 days to change your mind. You had 6 days to realize this was wrong. Why didn't you stop? Natalie, I don't know. Chen, you don't know? Or you didn't want to stop? Natalie, I wasn't thinking. Chen, but you were thinking clearly enough to hide the antifreeze. You were thinking clearly enough to delete your search history. You were thinking clearly enough to pour out your own eggnog so you wouldn't drink it. Every one of those actions required conscious decision-making, correct? Natalie, crying, yes. Chen. And when Detective Rivera asked if you put something in the eggnog, you lied. Correct? Natalie, yes. Chen. So you knew what you'd done was wrong. Natalie, sobbing, yes. Yes, I knew. I know it was wrong. I know I killed them. I know I'll never be forgiven. Chen. No further questions. Natalie collapsed in the witness chair, sobbing. A bailiff brought her tissues. The jury watched, some with sympathy, some with disgust. The defense rested. Closing arguments. On December 1, 2021, both sides delivered their final arguments to the jury. Margaret Chen spoke for 45 minutes, methodically reviewing every piece of evidence. She displayed the search history again. She showed the surveillance footage. She reminded the jury of the medical examiner's testimony about the victim's suffering. Natalie Harper wants you to believe she's a victim, Chen said. She wants you to believe pressure and mental illness drove her to this. But ladies and gentlemen, the evidence tells a different story. The evidence shows months of planning. The evidence shows calculation. The evidence shows a person who wanted money and freedom and was willing to murder her parents to get it. She researched. She purchased. She planned. She executed. And then she tried to cover it up. This was not a cry for help. This was not an impulsive act. This was murder. Premeditated, calculated, cold-blooded murder. The law is clear. First-degree murder requires premeditation and intent. The evidence proves both beyond any doubt. She is guilty, and I ask you to return that verdict. Thank you. Robert Castellano spoke for 35 minutes. Yes, Natalie did these things, he began. She's not disputing that. But she is not the monster the prosecution wants you to believe. She is a child who broke under unbearable pressure. You heard Dr. Moss testify about complex PTSD, about learned helplessness, about dissociative states. These are real conditions with real effects on decision-making. Yes, Natalie planned. But planning doesn't equal the kind of cold calculation required for first-degree murder. A truly cold-blooded killer would have covered her tracks better. She wouldn't have left antifreeze in her closet. She wouldn't have conducted Google searches that could be recovered. She wouldn't have used surveillance cameras. This is a 17-year-old child who was drowning and saw no way out. That doesn't excuse what she did. But it means this is not first-degree murder. This is tragedy. I'm asking you to see Natalie as a human being. A child. Someone who made a terrible, unforgivable choice, but who still deserves mercy. Thank you. Judge Faulkner delivered jury instructions explaining the legal definitions of first-degree murder, the burden of proof, and the requirement of unanimity. At 4:17 p.m. on December 1, 2021, the jury retired to deliberate. The jury deliberates. 7 hours that decided her fate. The jury deliberation room was cramped and windowless. A long table dominated the center, surrounded by 12 chairs. A whiteboard hung on one wall. A water cooler stood in the corner. The jurors filed in, carrying their notepads, and took their seats. Thomas Delgado, the accountant who had been elected foreperson, sat at the head of the table. He looked around at his fellow jurors, 11 strangers who had become a temporary community bonded by an impossible responsibility. Okay, Thomas said. I guess we should start with a preliminary vote, just to see where everyone stands. All in favor of guilty on count 1, the murder of David Harper, raise your hand. 8 hands went up immediately. All in favor of not guilty? No hands. Undecided? 4 hands. Lisa Freeman, Rebecca Lawson, Michelle Torres, and Eleanor Ross. Thomas made notes. All right, let's talk about it. What are people's concerns? Lisa Freeman, the stay-at-home mother, spoke first. I have kids, and I can't imagine any circumstances under which they would do something like this. But I also can't imagine sentencing a 17-year-old to life in prison. It feels wrong. David Park, the software engineer, leaned forward. But that's not the question we're answering. The question is, did she commit first-degree murder? And the evidence is overwhelming. She planned this for months. She researched methods. She bought materials. She executed the plan. That's premeditation. That's literally the definition of first-degree murder. But she's 17, Rebecca Lawson said. That psychologist talked about brain development. Teenagers don't think like adults. Plenty of 17-year-olds manage not to murder their parents. Marcus Jenkins, the electrician, said. The electrician said, My daughter is 17. She's stressed about college, too. She doesn't poison anyone. It's not just about stress. Eleanor Ross, the retired teacher, said gently. It's about trauma. That girl was raised in a pressure cooker. Conditional love, impossible standards. That does damage. Damaging enough to justify murder? Caroline Stroud, the nurse, asked. I work in an ER. I've seen what trauma does to people. But most people who experience trauma don't kill. They get therapy. They talk to someone. They ask for help. Did Natalie ask for help? Michelle Torres asked. Her school counselor testified that she recommended therapy and the parents didn't follow through, Eleanor said. But Natalie also never told anyone she was thinking about hurting her parents, Caroline replied. If she'd reached out, if she'd told a teacher or a counselor that she was having these thoughts, someone could have intervened. But she didn't. She kept it secret. That shows she knew it was wrong. Of course she knew it was wrong, Lisa said. But knowing something is wrong and being able to stop yourself are two different things when you're in a mental health crisis. Was she in a mental health crisis? David Park asked. Or was she calculating her inheritance? Silence. Angela Reeves, the librarian, spoke for the first time. I think both can be true. She could be depressed and anxious, and she could have decided to kill her parents for money. People are complicated. That's exactly right, Thomas said. The question is, does the mental health stuff negate the premeditation? Does it change first-degree murder to something else? Like what? James Morrison, the grocery store manager, asked. Second-degree murder, maybe? Lisa suggested. Or manslaughter. No, Caroline said firmly. Manslaughter is when you kill someone without planning it. This was planned for 3 months. And second-degree murder is when you kill with intent but without premeditation. The search history proves premeditation. So we're back to first-degree murder, David Park said. Unless we believe she wasn't capable of forming intent because of her mental state, Eleanor said. But that psychiatrist they put on the stand, the prosecution tore him apart. Susan Palmer, the sales manager, said. He admitted that planning over 3 months isn't consistent with impulsive teenage brain behavior. And the medical examiner's testimony, Kenneth Yamamoto said quietly. He'd been silent until now. Those people suffered. They died in agony. And she watched. The room fell silent again. Let's look at the evidence piece by piece, Thomas said. He stood and walked to the whiteboard. What do we know for certain? He wrote. Facts not in dispute. Natalie researched poisons for 3 months. 247 searches. Natalie bought antifreeze 6 days before the murders. Natalie hid antifreeze in her closet. Natalie made the eggnog. Natalie's parents died from ethylene glycol poisoning. Antifreeze found in Natalie's closet matched the poison in victims. Natalie calculated her inheritance. Natalie called 911, then hung up. Natalie lied to police initially. Okay, Thomas said. Given these facts, is there any reasonable doubt that Natalie poisoned her parents? All 12 jurors shook their heads. So the question is, does she meet the legal definition of first-degree murder? The judge said first-degree murder requires premeditation and intent. Do we have evidence of both? The search history is premeditation, David Park said. The inheritance calculation is intent, Caroline Stroud added. But intent can be negated by mental illness, Lisa Freeman argued. That's what the defense psychologist said. No, Marcus Jenkins said. The psychologist said Natalie had depression and PTSD. She didn't say Natalie didn't know right from wrong. She didn't say Natalie couldn't form intent. She just said Natalie was under pressure. That's not the same thing as being legally insane. He's right, Angela Reeves said. Legal insanity means you don't understand that what you're doing is wrong. But Natalie tried to hide the evidence. She deleted her search history. She lied to police. That proves she knew it was wrong. So she's guilty, James Morrison said. First-degree murder. Lisa Freeman's voice broke. I just can't imagine putting a child in prison for life. But that's not our decision, Thomas said gently. Sentencing is up to the judge. Our job is just to determine, is she guilty of what she's charged with? And based on the evidence? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They talked for another hour, reviewing testimony, discussing reasonable doubt, considering the defense arguments. At 8:30 p.m., Thomas called for another vote. All in favor of guilty on count 1. 11 hands went up. Lisa Freeman sat with her hands in her lap, tears streaming down her face. "Lisa," Thomas said gently. "I know," she whispered. "I know she's guilty. I can't." Eleanor Ross reached over and took Lisa's hand. "I have grandchildren," she said softly. "And if one of them did something like this, I'd want the jury to see them as human, to have mercy. But our job isn't mercy. Our job is justice. And justice means holding people accountable for what they did, even when they're young, even when it breaks our hearts." Lisa wiped her eyes. "Can we review the medical examiner's testimony one more time?" They did. They listened to the recording of Dr. Chen describing the victim's suffering, the stages of ethylene glycol poisoning, the agonizing hours before death. When it was over, Lisa Freeman raised her hand. "Guilty," she whispered. At 11:45 p.m., Thomas knocked on the door and informed the bailiff they had reached a verdict. At 11:52 p.m., the jury foreperson sent word to Judge Faulkner. They were ready. The verdict. At 12:07 a.m. on December 2, 2021, Judge Faulkner reconvened the court. Despite the late hour, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread that a verdict was imminent. Journalists who had been waiting in the press room rushed back. The Harper family filled the gallery. Spectators who had been camping out in the hallway filed in. The light seemed brighter than usual. The silence was absolute. Natalie Harper sat at the defense table between her two attorneys. She wore the same white blouse and black skirt she'd worn throughout the trial. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly together on the table. "Will the foreperson please rise?" Judge Faulkner said. Thomas Delgado stood. His hands trembled slightly as he held the verdict forms. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "Please hand the verdict forms to the bailiff." The bailiff, a large man in his 50s who had seen hundreds of verdicts read, walked solemnly to the jury box, took the forms from Thomas, and carried them to Judge Faulkner. The judge reviewed the forms in silence. Her face revealed nothing. After what felt like an eternity, she handed the forms back to the bailiff, who returned them to Thomas. "Will the defendant please rise?" Natalie stood. Robert Castellano and his co-counsel stood beside her. Castellano placed a steadying hand on Natalie's elbow. She swayed slightly. In the gallery, Catherine Harper's sister began to cry quietly. "Members of the jury," Judge Faulkner said, "in the matter of the people of the state of Illinois versus Natalie Ann Harper. As to count 1, the charge of first-degree murder in the death of David Michael Harper, how do you find?" Thomas Delgado's voice was steady but strained. "We find the defendant guilty." A collective gasp erupted from the gallery. Someone sobbed. A journalist bolted from the courtroom to call in the verdict. Judge Faulkner banged her gavel once. "Order, ta." The courtroom fell silent again. As to count 2, the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Catherine Ann Harper, how do you find? "We find the defendant guilty." More gasps. More sobs. Judge Faulkner banged her gavel again. "Order in this court." Natalie Harper made a sound, a small, choked whimper, and her legs gave out. She collapsed. Robert Castellano and a bailiff caught her before she hit the ground. They lowered her into her chair. A court officer called for paramedics. "We'll take a recess," Judge Faulkner announced. "Sentencing will be scheduled for a later date. Jury, you are dismissed with the court's thanks for your service." The jurors filed out. Several were crying. Thomas Delgado would later tell reporters, "It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, but it was the right decision." Paramedics arrived and checked Natalie's vital signs. She was conscious but in shock. After 15 minutes, she was able to stand and was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs. She had been convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. In Illinois, first-degree murder carries a sentence of 20 years to life. For multiple murders, sentences run consecutively, not concurrently. Natalie Harper was facing life in prison. The only question was whether she would ever have a chance at parole. Sentencing hearing, January 14, 2022. Sentencing hearings are where the human cost of crime is laid bare. It's where victims, or their families, get to speak directly to the defendant, to tell them what they took, what they destroyed, what can never be repaired. Natalie Harper's sentencing hearing took place on January 14, 2022, nearly 4 weeks after her conviction. The delay was deliberate. Judge Faulkner wanted the defense to have time to prepare mitigation evidence, and she wanted the prosecution to have time to coordinate victim impact statements. The courtroom was once again packed. The Harper family filled 3 rows. Natalie's uncle, Richard Harper, sat alone on the defense side, his face drawn and gray. At 9:00 a.m., Judge Faulkner called the court to order. We're here for sentencing in the matter of the people versus Natalie Ann Harper. The defendant has been convicted by a jury of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Before I impose sentence, Illinois law allows for victim impact statements. I will hear from anyone who wishes to speak. Will the first speaker please come forward? Victim impact statement #1. Richard Harper. Richard Harper walked to the lectern. He was 49 years old, a marine biologist from Seattle. He and David had been close. They talked every week, visited each other twice a year. He had flown to Illinois on Christmas Day when he got the news, and had not left since. Your Honor, Richard began, his voice shaking. My brother was my best friend. When we were kids, he used to help me with my math homework. When I got divorced, he flew to Seattle to help me move out of my house. When my daughter was born, he was there at the hospital. David was excited about retirement. He was excited about traveling with Catherine. He was excited about walking Natalie down the aisle someday, about meeting his grandchildren. He'll never do any of those things. Catherine was brilliant. She saved children's lives. She had just been promoted to chief of surgery. She mentored young doctors. She volunteered at free clinics on weekends. She had decades of good work ahead of her. And Natalie. Richard's voice broke. Natalie is my niece. I loved her. I still love her. But I have to stand here today and tell you what she did to my family. She didn't just kill 2 people. She destroyed a family. She destroyed any possibility of healing. She destroyed her own future. I'm Natalie's guardian now. I manage the estate she killed for. I have to visit her in prison. I have to live with the fact that my brother's child murdered him for money. Your Honor, I love Natalie. Part of me still does. But what she did is unforgivable. She planned it for months. She executed it on Christmas Eve. She showed no remorse until she was caught. I ask that you impose the maximum sentence. Not out of revenge, but because Natalie needs to understand, truly understand, the enormity of what she's done. Maybe in 30 or 40 years, if she's ever released, she'll have become a person who values human life. But right now, she's dangerous. David and Catherine deserved better. They deserved to grow old together. They deserved to see their grandchildren. Natalie took that away, and she needs to pay for it. Thank you, Your Honor. Richard returned to his seat, his shoulders shaking with quiet sob. Victim impact statement, #2. Dr. Sharon Martinez. Dr. Martinez was a pediatric surgeon who had worked alongside Catherine Harper for 12 years. Your Honor, I worked with Dr. Catherine Harper for over a decade. She was my mentor, my colleague, and my friend. Catherine taught me how to be a better surgeon. She taught me to stay calm in crisis, to trust my training, to always put the patient first. She was supposed to retire in 5 years. We were planning to write a textbook together on pediatric trauma surgery. She was supposed to train the next generation of surgeons. I think about her every time I operate. I think about the children who will never benefit from her skill. I think about the residents she would have trained, the lives she would have saved. Natalie took all of that away because she was impatient, because she wanted money she didn't need and freedom she already had. Your Honor, Catherine Harper was one of the best surgeons I've ever known. She was one of the best people I've ever known. Please, don't let Natalie out. Please make sure she understands that some things can never be undone. Thank you. Hi. Victim Impact Statement #3. Jeffrey Harper, David's colleague. Your Honor, I worked with David Harper for 18 years. He was the most ethical person I've ever met. He turned down lucrative deals if he thought they were morally questionable. He donated 20% of his income to charity. He was a good man. David was supposed to be the best man at my wedding in March. Now I have to explain to my 8-year-old son why Mr. Harper isn't coming. I visit David's grave every week. I talk to him. I tell him about work, about my family, about the market. I can't believe he's gone. I can't believe his own daughter did this. Your Honor, please make sure she never gets out. Please. Victim Impact Statement #4. Molly James, Catherine's sister. Your Honor, my sister was the kindest person I knew. She was brilliant and accomplished, but she was also warm and funny and generous. When my husband died 3 years ago, Catherine flew to Boston and stayed with me for 2 weeks. She cooked for me. She held me while I cried. She helped me figure out how to keep going. Now, she's gone, and I don't have anyone to call when I need help. I don't have anyone who understands me the way she did. Natalie had everything. Loving parents, a beautiful home, a college scholarship, a future, and she threw it all away for money. For $3 million that she calculated to the penny while her parents were still alive. Your Honor, I have 3 children, and if any of them ever did something like this, I would want them punished to the fullest extent of the law, because some things are unforgivable. Please give her life without parole. Please make sure she never hurts anyone else. Thank you. What? Victim Impact Statement #5. Amanda Peterson, neighbor. Your Honor, I lived next door to the Harpers for 8 years. I knew them as neighbors. I knew Natalie as a babysitter. She watched my kids a few times. She was always so composed, so mature, so responsible. I'll never forget Christmas morning. We were opening presents with our kids when police cars started arriving at the Harper house. We didn't know what had happened. When we found out, I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it. My kids ask why Natalie isn't around anymore. I don't know what to tell them. Your Honor, I keep thinking about Catherine texting me a picture of the prime rib before she cooked it. She was excited about Christmas Eve dinner. And Natalie was in the kitchen, measuring out poison. Please don't let her out. Please. 6 more people spoke. All said versions of the same thing. Natalie Harper destroyed lives, destroyed a family, destroyed any possibility of forgiveness. Finally, Judge Faulkner asked if Natalie wanted to speak. Robert Castellano advised her against it, but Natalie insisted. She stood, wearing orange jail scrubs now instead of courtroom attire. She was no longer trying to look young and sympathetic. She looked exhausted, broken. Your Honor, Natalie began, her voice barely audible. I know nothing I say will fix what I did. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I destroyed my family. I know I took away 2 people who made the world better. I think about them every single day. I think about Christmas Eve. I think about how I could have stopped. How I should have stopped. I would give anything, to undo it. But I can't. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know that's not enough. But I need everyone to know that I'm sorry. She sat down. The courtroom was silent. Judge Faulkner took a deep breath. Natalie Ann Harper, please stand. Natalie stood, flanked by her attorneys. You have been convicted by a jury of your peers of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The evidence showed that you planned these murders for 3 months. You researched methods. You purchased materials. You calculated the financial benefit. And you executed your plan on Christmas Eve, one of the most sacred nights in our culture. You murdered your parents. 2 people who, whatever their faults, loved you and provided for you. You murdered them in their own home, in the midst of a family tradition, on a night meant for peace and celebration. You murdered them for money and for freedom, motivations that, frankly, reveal a level of selfishness and callousness that is difficult to comprehend. The defense has argued that you were under pressure, that you suffered from mental illness, that you were a child in crisis. I have considered those arguments carefully. I have reviewed Dr. Moss's psychological evaluation. I have read the letters submitted on your behalf by teachers and friends. But I have also considered the evidence. 247 internet searches. 3 months of planning. The calculated inheritance note. The antifreeze hidden in your closet. The lies you told the police. These are not the actions of someone in a dissociative state. These are the actions of someone who made a choice, a series of choices, to commit murder. Illinois law allows me discretion in sentencing juveniles. I could sentence you to a term of years with the possibility of parole. Some people believe that no child should be sentenced to die in prison. But I do not believe you are a child. You may be 17 years old chronologically, but your actions demonstrate a level of calculation and premeditation that exceeds many adult offenders I have sentenced. More importantly, I believe that certain crimes are so heinous, so irredeemable, that mercy is inappropriate. You took 2 lives. You destroyed a family. You did it for money. And you showed no remorse until you were caught. Therefore, on count 1, the murder of David Michael Harper, I sentence you to natural life in prison without the possibility of parole. On count 2, the murder of Catherine Ann Harper, I sentence you to natural life in prison without the possibility of parole. These sentences will run consecutively. Natalie Harper, you will spend the rest of your life in prison. You will die there. That is the consequence of what you have done. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Natalie Harper collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Bailiffs moved to escort her out. As she was led away in handcuffs, she looked back once at her Uncle Richard. He looked away. She would be transferred to Logan Correctional Center within a week. She would never be free again. Epilogue. Where is Natalie Harper now? Natalie Ann Harper, inmate number R47-1832, is currently incarcerated at Logan Correctional Center in Lincoln, Illinois. She is now 21 years old. She spends 23 hours a day in her cell due to disciplinary issues. 3 fights with other inmates in her first year, 2 more in her second year. She is housed in the restrictive housing unit for her own safety. She takes online college courses through a prison education program. She is studying psychology. Her professors describe her as intelligent, but detached. The $2.83 million estate she murdered for has been distributed according to her uncle's discretion. Richard Harper donated $1.50 million to establish the David and Catherine Harper Memorial Scholarship at Northwestern University, providing full scholarships for pre-med and economics students. Another $800,000 went to pediatric surgery research at Loyola Medical Center in Catherine's name. The remainder was donated to mental health organizations. Natalie will never touch a penny of it. Her case prompted legislative debate in Illinois about juvenile sentencing. A bill was introduced in 2022 to prohibit life without parole sentences for offenders under 18. It failed to pass. As of 2025, the law remains unchanged. Riley Martinez, Natalie's best friend, graduated from high school in 2021 and moved to Los Angeles. She has never visited Natalie in prison. She has stated publicly that she never will. The Natalie I knew died on Christmas Eve, Riley said in an interview. I don't know who's in that prison, but it's not my friend. The Harper house on Oakmont Drive was sold in June 2022 for $1.10 million, $200,000 below market value. The real estate listing did not mention what had happened there, but everyone in Naperville knew. The new owners, a couple from California, gutted the interior. They repainted every room. They replaced the kitchen. They tore up the hardwood floors where David Harper died. They're trying to erase the memory, but everyone in the neighborhood still knows it as the murder house. On Christmas Eve each year, Someone, no one knows who, leaves 2 white roses on the front porch. Every year, the new owners throw them away. Every year, they reappear. Detective Sarah Rivera retired from the Naperville Police Department in August 2024. The Harper case was her last major investigation. "You never forget a case like that," she told a reporter. "You never forget a kid who could do something so cold. I still think about it. I still wonder if there was something I could have said, some way I could have gotten through to her. But I don't think there was. I think she made her choice long before I met her." Judge Patricia Faulkner, when asked years later if she had any regrets about the sentence, said simply, "No. Some crimes are unforgivable. Some people forfeit their right to freedom. Natalie Harper is one of them." Natalie Harper will be eligible for clemency review in 2050 when she is 47 years old. Given the nature of her crimes, the overwhelming evidence against her, and the lack of mitigating circumstances, clemency is highly unlikely. She will almost certainly die in prison, as will the memory of the girl she was before Christmas Eve 2020, as will any possibility of redemption. On January 14, 2025, the 3rd anniversary of her sentencing, Natalie Harper wrote a letter to her Uncle Richard. He did not open it. He burned it. He told a family member, "I don't want to know what she has to say. There's nothing she can say that will change anything." The case remains one of the most notorious family murders in Illinois history. It has been covered in dozens of true crime podcasts, 3 documentary series, and countless articles. It has become a cultural reference point for discussions about nature versus nurture, juvenile justice reform, and the psychological effects of high-pressure parenting. But for the people who knew David and Catherine Harper, for Richard Harper, for Dr. Sharon Martinez, for the colleagues and friends and neighbors, it's not a cultural talking point. It's a wound that will never heal. It's a tragedy that could have been prevented. It's a reminder that the people we love are never as knowable as we believe. And it's proof that some losses can never be made whole. Natalie Harper took 2 lives on Christmas Eve 2020. But the damage she did extends far beyond 2 deaths. It extends to every person who loved David and Catherine. It extends to every Christmas Eve that their family will spend without them. It extends to every child who will never be saved by Catherine Harper's surgical skill. It extends to every person who wonders, late at night, whether someone they love is capable of the unthinkable. Natalie Harper will die in prison, but her crime will live forever.